The day Daniel Mensah returned home after 7 years abroad, he expected tears, laughter, and the warmth of a family that had waited for him. During countless lonely nights in a foreign country, he had imagined that moment so many times it felt almost real. He pictured his wife Grace running into his arms. He pictured his daughter Miriam, no longer the little girl he had left behind, smiling through happy tears. Every sacrifice he had made had been for that day. Every extra shift, every missed holiday, every night spent sleeping in cramped rooms with other workers had been fueled by one dream: giving his family a better life. For 7 years, Daniel had worked in construction. The labor was brutal. His hands carried scars that would never disappear. His back often ached so badly he could barely stand at the end of a shift. Yet, whenever he thought about quitting, he remembered Grace and Miriam waiting for him at home. He remembered the house they were building together. He remembered the promises they had made. One day he would return. One day the struggle would be over. That dream had kept him moving forward. A month before his return, Daniel decided not to tell anyone the exact date of his arrival. He wanted it to be a surprise. He imagined the joy on their faces when they saw him standing at the door unexpectedly. The thought made him smile during the long flight home. As the taxi carried him through the familiar roads of his village, Daniel felt his heart racing with excitement. The place looked different than he remembered. New buildings stood where empty lots had once been. Fresh paint brightened old structures. The village seemed more prosperous. But something felt strange. People stared at him. At first, he assumed it was because they recognized him. After all, 7 years was a long time. Yet the expressions on their faces unsettled him. Some looked surprised. Others appeared uncomfortable. A few quickly turned away when their eyes met his. Daniel tried to ignore it. Perhaps he was imagining things. Perhaps he was simply nervous about returning home. The taxi eventually stopped in front of his property. Daniel stepped out and froze. The house was beautiful, far more beautiful than he had expected. The small home he had left behind had transformed into an impressive modern residence. Fresh paint covered the exterior walls. Decorative fencing surrounded the property. The garden was carefully maintained. For a moment, pride flooded through him. His sacrifices had been worth it. Every painful year abroad had produced something tangible. This house, this future, this home. Then he noticed a black SUV parked beside the building. Daniel frowned. The vehicle was expensive, far more expensive than anything his family could afford. He stared at it for several seconds. Perhaps Grace had visitors. Perhaps a relative was staying over. The explanation seemed reasonable enough. Yet a strange feeling settled in his chest, a feeling he could not explain. He picked up his suitcase and walked toward the front door. As he approached, he heard laughter coming from inside. A man's laughter. Daniel stopped. His heart skipped a beat. The voice was unfamiliar. He stood perfectly still, listening. Another burst of laughter echoed through the house. Then silence. The front door was slightly open. That alone felt unusual. Grace was always careful about security. Slowly, Daniel pushed the door open and stepped inside. The living room looked different, very different. New furniture filled the space. Expensive decorations hung on the walls. A massive television dominated one corner of the room. Nothing looked familiar anymore. Daniel glanced around uneasily. The changes weren't necessarily bad, but they didn't feel like decisions he and Grace would have made together. The room felt like someone else's home. "Grace?" he called. No answer. "Grace?" Footsteps suddenly approached from the hallway. A second later, his wife appeared. For one brief moment, pure shock crossed her face. Not joy, not excitement. Shock. The color drained from her cheeks. Her eyes widened. She stared at him as though she had seen something impossible. "Daniel?" she whispered. A forced smile slowly appeared on her lips, but it never reached her eyes. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. He had imagined this reunion for years. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. "I wanted to surprise you," he said. "Yes, you certainly did." Her voice sounded strained, nervous, almost frightened. Daniel set down his suitcase. "Aren't you going to hug me?" Grace hesitated. Only for a second, but Daniel noticed. Then she quickly stepped forward and embraced him. The hug felt cold, brief, unnatural. When she pulled away, she immediately glanced toward the staircase. It happened so quickly she probably thought he wouldn't notice. But he did. And suddenly, all the strange feelings he had been dismissing began growing stronger. "Where's Miriam?" he asked. "At school." Daniel checked his watch. Classes should have ended nearly an hour ago. Grace noticed his expression. "She's attending an after-school program today." The answer came too quickly, almost rehearsed. Before Daniel could respond, another sound echoed from upstairs. A thud, like something falling. Grace visibly tensed. The reaction was impossible to miss. Daniel slowly looked toward the second floor, then back at his wife. Neither spoke. The silence stretched painfully between them. "What was that?" Daniel asked. Grace forced a laugh. "Probably nothing." "Nothing? Maybe a window." Daniel stared at her. The explanation made no sense. The sound had clearly come from inside the house. He began noticing other details. A pair of men's shoes sat near the staircase. Not his. A men's jacket hung beside the front entrance. Not his. A set of car keys rested on the table. Not his. His pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Very wrong. Grace noticed where he was looking. Her face grew pale. "Daniel, whose shoes are those?" She hesitated. "A cousin." "Cousin?" "Yes." "Which cousin?" Her silence lasted too long. Far too long. The answer never came. Instead, another sound echoed from upstairs. This time, it was unmistakable. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps. Someone was walking across the upper floor. Daniel felt a chill move through his body. The footsteps stopped. Then everything became quiet. Too quiet. His eyes slowly lifted toward the staircase. Grace stepped in front of him, almost instinctively, as though trying to block his path. "Daniel, maybe we should sit down first." "Move." "Please." "Move, Grace." Fear flashed across her face. Real fear. Daniel had never seen her look that way before. His heart pounded harder with every passing second. The pieces were beginning to form a picture he desperately wanted to belong. Without another word, he stepped around her. Grace grabbed his arm. "Daniel, wait!" He pulled free. The stairs suddenly felt much longer than they should have. Each step carried him closer to whatever truth his wife was trying so desperately to hide. Behind him, Grace followed. Her breathing sounded uneven, panicked. Daniel reached the second-floor hallway. The door to the master bedroom stood slightly open. Their bedroom. The room he had helped design before leaving. The room he had dreamed about returning to. The room where he had imagined sleeping beside his wife again after 7 long years. His hand touched the doorknob. Behind him, Grace whispered his name. He ignored her. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The room looked different. New furniture, new decorations, new photographs. And on the bed, beneath the blankets, a man was sleeping peacefully. A complete stranger. In Daniel's bed. Inside Daniel's house. The man stirred slightly as sunlight touched his face. His eyes opened. For a few confused seconds, he simply stared at Daniel. Then he sat upright. The stranger looked surprised, but not nearly as surprised as Daniel. Because in that moment, Daniel realized something that made his blood run cold. The stranger wasn't reacting like a visitor who had been caught. He was reacting like a man who believed he belonged there. For several seconds, nobody moved. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway. The stranger sat on the bed staring at him. Grace remained behind them, her face pale with panic. Finally, the stranger spoke. "Who are you?" The question hit Daniel like a slap. Who was he? In his own house? In his own bedroom? Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "I should be asking you that." The man frowned and looked toward Grace. "What's going on?" Grace couldn't answer. Her silence told Daniel more than words ever could. "I am Daniel Mensah," he said. "This house belongs to me." The stranger's expression changed instantly. Confusion, then disbelief, then anger. "No," he said firmly. "Grace told me her husband abandoned her years ago." The room fell silent. Daniel slowly turned toward his wife. Abandoned her? After 7 years of sending money every month? After every sacrifice he had made? Grace lowered her eyes. She couldn't even look at him. The stranger climbed out of bed. "My name is Samuel," he said. "Grace told me she was alone. She said her husband disappeared and never came back." Daniel felt rage building inside him. Yet something in Samuel's face made him pause. The man looked shocked, too, as if he had just discovered a terrible lie. "How long have you been here?" Daniel asked. Samuel hesitated. "Almost 2 years." 2 years. The words echoed in Daniel's mind. For 2 years, another man had been living in the house he paid for, sleeping in the room he built, living the life that was supposed to be his. A crowd was beginning to gather outside. News traveled fast in the village. Daniel could hear voices near the gate. Whispers, questions, curiosity. Someone had already noticed his return. Grace finally spoke. "Daniel, please let me explain." "Explain what?" he asked coldly. "Explain how a stranger ended up in my bed?" Tears filled her eyes. But Daniel felt nothing. Not sympathy, not pity, only betrayal. Then Samuel said something unexpected. "Wait." Everyone looked at him. "I bought part of this property." Daniel stared. "What?" Samuel pointed downstairs. "The documents. Grace showed me ownership papers. I invested my savings into renovating this place." Daniel felt the floor disappear beneath him. Ownership papers? Investment? His eyes moved slowly toward Grace. For the first time, genuine fear appeared in her face. The kind of fear that comes when every lie is finally collapsing. And Daniel suddenly realized this wasn't just about another man. Something much bigger had been hidden from him. Daniel rushed downstairs and headed straight for the cabinet where Grace always kept important documents. It was empty. His property records were gone. Bank receipts were gone. Everything had disappeared. Behind him, Villagers began entering the yard. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed relieved that the truth was finally coming out. An elderly neighbor stepped forward. "Daniel," she said quietly. People tried to tell her this would end badly. Daniel looked at Grace. "How long?" Grace remained silent. The neighbor answered for her. "Almost 3 years. 3 years of lies. 3 years of pretending he was gone for good." Samuel looked devastated. "You told me you were legally separated," he said. "You said he never contacted you." "I thought he wasn't coming back," Grace whispered. Daniel laughed bitterly. "You thought that after 7 years of monthly transfers?" The crowd began murmuring. Everyone knew Daniel had been sending money home. Everyone. Which meant Grace could never claim she believed he had abandoned her. Samuel suddenly reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. "I have copies of everything." Grace's eyes widened. Daniel immediately noticed. For the first time that day, she looked truly afraid. Samuel opened the folder and handed him several papers. As Daniel read them, his face darkened. His signature appeared on multiple documents. Documents he had never signed. Someone had forged his name. And judging by Grace's reaction, she knew exactly who had done it. The crowd fell silent, because what had started as a story of infidelity was becoming something much worse. It was fraud, and everyone knew the authorities would soon become involved.